Emma.
This whole round.
Yeah. Because it's private property.
I'm going to say these things because this is the footprint that we're talking about. So be aware of that in terms of the sound. Oh, no, actually, sorry. I got it up here. All right, thank you for bearing with us, and we will begin the presentations for this site. We are at 17th and East Gray Street. We are not on the site of Goodwin's Jail, but it was right across the street there at the intersection of 17th and East Gray Street. And our first presenter here will be Kim Allen. She is a cultural anthropologist, and she will give an overview of slavery and the slave trade in Richmond.
Okay. So I'm a teacher and not a preacher, and so this is a little history lesson, and we'll have to do it very, very quickly in 10 minutes, the whole history of slavery in Shockoe Bottom here. But I want to make several points that I want you to listen for. The first is that Richmond became wealthy for breeding and selling human beings. The second is that Shockoe Bottom, this area here, was at the heart of this particular form of economic development. And third, the result of this is that it's upwards to half of all African Americans can trace their ancestry through this area. Right? Okay, so first, slavery in Virginia. In 1619, the first Africans arrived in Jamestown, Virginia as indentured servants. So we didn't come to this country as enslaved people, but as indentured servants. In 1630, miscegenation was outlawed. The first Africans were brought to Virginia's Jamestown in 1619 as indentured servants. And the idea for indentured servitude came out of the need for cheap labor in the colonies. Servants typically worked for 4 to 7 years in exchange for passage, room and board, lodging, and freedom dues. Life was harsh and restrictive, but indentured servitude was not slavery. Slavery became codified in law, or made law, after a lawsuit in 1654. It became a law in 1654. By 1662, 8 years later, slavery had become a racial caste system. So it wasn't necessarily connected up with race initially, but it became so in 1662. And this is important to see that this system developed over time. It wasn't whole and complete when it was introduced, but it developed over time. In 1691, the law was amended such that mixed-race children. So first off, when it became codified in law and became a racial caste system, it ruled that the children of enslaved women would be born into slavery regardless of the father's race or status. And that was very different from English common law. In English common law, the children gained the status of the father. But in this colony, it was quite the opposite. So the children of the enslaved woman became slaves themselves. In 1699, Virginia passed a law deporting all free blacks. And by doing so, because not all of us were enslaved, yes, and in doing so, defining slaves, all persons of African descent who remained in the city. So if you were a free person, and you chose to, free black, and you chose to stay in Virginia after 1699, you risked being enslaved. Okay, now Richmond's role in the transatlantic slave trade. So what we had was, this place was the place that received international cargo, if you will, people from outside of the United States. African men, women, and children who survived the Middle Passage were brought by ship up the James River. They were unloaded at Manchester Docks, which is across the river, and forced to walk to the slaveholding pens or jails here in Shockoe Bottom. And this trail is the origin of the Richmond Slave Trail, or the Trail of Enslaved Africans. Virginia instituted a ban on the importation of Africans in 1778, 2 years after it declared its independence from Britain, from England. The slavery officially ended here with the fall of Richmond at the close of the Civil War in 1865, even though President Lincoln had issued the emancipation, the preliminary one in 1862, and then a final one in 1863. But Chaco Bottom's role in this institution, so it shifted from receiving enslaved Africans from the continent into becoming what's called a breeder state. By the 1830s, instead of principally receiving human cargo or human beings from overseas, Chaco Bottom increasingly functioned as the place of departure for enslaved Africans, being grown like a cash crop and sold from Virginia to plantations in the Deep South. And so what we know about a cash crop is that it is grown in order to produce a profit, as opposed to being, as opposed to helping you and your family survive. It's grown in order to produce a profit. Okay. And so what was the cause of this switch from the transatlantic slave trade to Virginia being a breeder state? Several factors. One was the Haitian Revolution that took place over 17 years, from 1791 to 1804. It was a slave revolt that scared the bejesus out of those in the Western world, afraid of the, what I like to think as the fresh fighting spirit of newly arrived Africans, right? Other reasons for the change included the increased need for labor to work on the cotton plantations. At this time, the United States had purchased Louisiana from the French, opening up westward expansion and they created plantations, cotton plantations in the Louisiana territories. And so there was a need for labor to work those plantations. Other reasons for the change included the production of cotton became cheaper. Yeah. I got it. I'm lost now. So with this increased demand for labor, Richmond and Chaco Bottom became an important place to grow that labor. One slave trader bragged of producing 6,000 children and selling 6,000 children. That was just one trader. And so it's really interesting to think how many people were actually moved through this very small piece of territory. Let's see. It's estimated that between 1835 and 1865, 300,000 to 350,000 people of African descent had been sold out of Virginia, most of those passing through Chaco Bottom. Between 1830 and 1840, that's a 10-year window, 10,000 to 11,000 people were sold each year. 10 to 11,000 people each year out of this area here. Slavery was big business, right? Slave traders profited. There were formal corporations. There were freelance individuals who got into the trade themselves. Homes and offices located north and south of Broad Street, between 17th and 18th Streets. That's where their offices were. They often had in their homes, offices where they would show human beings for sale. Jail owners profited. We know about Lumpkin's jail. There's also Omohundro's jail and Bacon Tate jail at 15th and Cary. And they were just located throughout the district. 15th and Cary is that way. 17th and Grace is here. Lumpkin's jail is over there. So throughout the district were these jails. Auction houses, between some 40 and 50 of those, mostly located along 15th Street. It was called Wall Street. Auctions were also held along East Franklin Street at hotels like the Exchange Hotel, Charles and City Hotels, the Metropolitan and Oddfellows Halls. A Bell Tavern was one other place where these human beings were sold. Commodity brokers profited. Their offices were along East Cary Street from west of 15th to about 19th Street. The town whipping post most likely stood in what is now 17th Street Market. Additional slave-related businesses included law firms. They had to draw up the papers, property deeds. Insurance companies, property had to be insured in case of theft or loss. Shipping and railroad lines benefited. One of those railroads developed into present-day CSX Corporation, and to help attract the trade, to help attract the business of slave dealers, they offered free transportation to children. Blacksmith shops, dry goods stores, including the original Tallheimers one-room establishment, which sold clothes that were used to put on enslaved people prior to their sale. The media also benefited. They benefited from running ads for runaways and for advertising auctions. Additional slave-related sites throughout the district include the municipal cemetery, which has become the African burial grounds. Selling people was profitable. Merchants and professionals took part. The city of Richmond, through tax collection on property, benefited. The state of Virginia, through the assessment of fees and licenses for traders, benefited. The famed attorney Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, his attorney did legal work for Thomas Prosser, the man who owned Gabriel. By the 1840s, the slave trade had become such a large economic factor that the city of Richmond began to look for ways to regulate the business and to benefit financially. In 1842, Richmond City Council required that auctioneers be licensed to sell enslaved people. The city charter allowed a tax to be levied on slave jails and slave traders. In 1861, Richmond realized $10,000 in revenue from the licensing and taxing of the slave trade. And in today's value, that's anywhere between $269,000 to $35 million. I just wanted you to get a sense of the pervasiveness of the institutional nature of the slave trading business. It was not located or confined to one site. This was a financial district, a booming financial district, right? That lawyers and commodity brokers and jailers and auctioneers all benefited. The city itself benefited, the state of Virginia benefited. This was the site of the second largest slave trading district in the country.
I'd like to have Elizabeth Kambourian come up, please, and give us an explanation of the slave trade-related sites in the footprint of the proposed Revitalize RVA Economic Development Plan.
I found in plotting out some of the maps where these businesses are, that there were about 5 slave jails in this area. One, of course, was Lumpkin's, and that's 15th Street, what was 15th Street. And then about halfway between Lumpkin's and Main Street, there was another one that belonged to Dickinson and Hill. Then at 15th and Main was yet another one. And there was also one at Cary and 15th. There was one at 17th and Broad as well. And it seems that most of these businesses clustered around those slave jails. But I'd never thought of it, but obvious reason was if you're dealing in slaves, you got to keep them somewhere. And they would rent rooms or, space from these slave jails to keep their slaves in while they were selling them or hiring them out. I've got about 137 different businesses that either hired slaves or sold them. By hiring, I mean they hired them out from owners to go work for somebody else, like at Tredegar, or sometimes they went to the mines in Midlothian, or to private plantations that didn't want to necessarily buy extra help, they would rent it. Some of the newspaper ads I thought were interesting. I thought I'd just read a few so you could get a feel for what was advertised in the paper with people doing different aspects of the, I'm doing it again, thank you. Okay, J. Thompson Brown, who incidentally was a big developer in Richmond, for hire, a first-rate carriage driver, a housemaid and seamstress, and a boy 19 years old who has been accustomed to waiting in the house. That was advertised in the Richmond Dispatch in 1862. E. A. J. Clopton. The subscriber begs to return his acknowledgments to his friends and patrons and inform them that he still continues in the business of hiring out Negroes, renting out houses, and collecting claims. That's 1860 newspaper. B. A. Cock. To remain in or near the city, an able young Negro man about 22 years of age, also a woman, a good cook and washer, about 45 years old, and a good teamster who's not restricted to the city, for sale or for hire for the balance of the year. That was 1861. J.P. Bell. This is a card, which usually meant they were announcing a new business. Auctioneer, 122 Main Street. Immediate attention given and prompt returns made for all consignments. Particular attention given to the sale of Negroes. Charges moderate. October 1862. Betts and Gregory, who was up here at 17th and Broad, 1860. Cook, washer, ironer for sale. We have for sale privately a #1 bread, meat, and pastry cook, who is also an excellent washer and ironer. 24 years of age, strong, healthy, and sound, and free of encumbrance. Her owner, in order to secure for her a good home in this city or state, will sell her for less than her real value to any person in need of a woman with such qualifications. And to effect this, will accommodate the purchaser if it is desired by settlement in 5 months' time. Okay, the Cary Street Jail. S. Grady, proprietor. Corner of 15th and Cary. For sale, to remain in or near Richmond. A fair-sized, pretty good-looking man, farmhand and driver. 42 years old, apply at the Cary Street Jail. Davis, Dupre and Company, who Dupre was also up near 17th and Broad, will give their entire attention to the sale of Negroes, publicly and privately. Oddfellows Hall, corner of Mayo and Franklin Street. This is when Dupre went into business with one of the Davis brothers. He had originally been up at Broad Street. So basically, all the way down from 15th Street, where we were at Lumpkin's Jail, all the way down to Cary Street was a solid line of slave dealers, whether hiring out or purchasing or selling. In there were 4 slave jails that they could use. Up here, from Broad Street, I guess down to Franklin, it was, up and down the street, it was full of slave dealers. And then they had 2 jails there. One that belonged to the people that kept the Northup slave. When he was kept there, he wasn't a slave, but he was kept there as a slave. So I think that pretty much sums it up.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'd now like to welcome Linsey Williams. She is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Solomon Northup, the author of 12 Years a Slave, and she will read an account of the night that he spent in the slave jail located in the proposed stadium area here at 17th and East Gray Streets. Welcome, Linsey, and your family.
evening. I am excited and I'm so happy to be here with you all today. I also have with me...
Closer to your mouth.
Oops, sorry. I'm also proud to have with me
Justin Dixon Northup Gilliam, and I'm her cousin.
Yes, and Justin is also a descendant of Solomon Northup. So I initially found out about what's going on here in Richmond on Facebook. Somehow, I think it was an advertisement for this event that came across my news feed, and I was interested, and so I read through it, and I wanted to learn more, and so I just asked. I asked for more information, and there were a number of people here in Richmond who graciously provided me with a lot of reading material and helped me to learn more about what's going on here, and so I am glad and I'm proud to be here in support of the work that you all are doing here. I just wanted to share, when I first heard or first found, my first memory of knowing that Solomon Northup was my great-grandfather happened when I was about 9 or 10, and I had the opportunity with my family to visit Saratoga Springs. And we were able to visit Solomon Northup's home from when he was in Saratoga Springs, places where he worked, and we actually had the opportunity to stand right in the place where he met the men who participated in his capture. And just to have that opportunity at such a young age, I was able to recognize the importance of what that meant. And I hope to have those experiences with my future children. So I think it's very important that the work that is being here to support keeping this area and preserving it is important. And so we are going to read together a portion of Solomon Northup's book, 12 Years a Slave, where he discusses his time here in Richmond. Okay. At Fredericksburg, where we transferred from the stagecoach to a car, and before dark arrived in Richmond, the chief city of Virginia. At this city, we were taken from the cars and driven through the street to a slave pen between the railroad depot and the river, kept by a Mr. Gooden. This pen is similar to Williams's in Washington, except it was somewhat larger, and besides, there were 2 small houses standing at opposite corners within the yard. These houses are usually found within slave yards, being used as rooms for the examination of human chattels by purchasers before concluding a bargain. Unsoundness in a slave, as well as in a horse, detracts materially from its value. If no warranty is given, a close examination is a matter of particular importance to the Negro jockey. We were met at the door of Gooden's yard by that gentleman himself, a short, fat man with a round, plump face, black hair and whiskers, and a complexion almost as dark as some of his own Negroes. He had a hard, stern look and was perhaps about 50 years of age. Birch and he met with great cordiality. They were evidently old friends, shaking each other warmly by the hand. Birch remarked he had brought some company, inquired at what time the brig would leave, and was answered that it would probably leave the next day at such an hour. Gooden then turned to me, took hold of my arm, turned me partly round, looked at me sharply with the air of one who considered himself a good judge of property, and as if estimating in his own mind about how much I was worth. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. But in the morning, having swept the yard and washed ourselves under Gooden's superintendence, we were ordered to roll up our blankets and make ready for the continuance of our journey. Clem Ray was informed that he would go no further. Birch, for some reason, or for some cause, having concluded to carry him back to Washington. He was much rejoiced. Shaking hands, we parted in the slave pen at Richmond, and I have not seen him since.
And I will read one of the last chapters of the book. It kind of encompasses his feelings at the end. My narrative is at an end. I have no comments to make upon the subject of slavery. Those who read this book may form their own opinions of the peculiar institution. What I may be in other states, I do not profess to know. What it is in the region of the Red River is truly and faithfully delineated in these pages. This is no fiction, no exaggeration. If I have failed in anything, it has been in presenting to the reader too promptly the bright side of this picture. I doubt not hundreds, have been as unfortunate as myself. That hundreds of free citizens have been kidnapped and sold into slavery, and are at this moment wearing out their lives on plantations in Texas and Louisiana, not to mention Richmond. But I forbear, chastened and subdued in spirit by the sufferings I have borne, and thankful to that good being through whose mercy I have been restored to happiness and liberty. I hope henceforth to lead an upright through lowly life and rest at last in the churchyard where my father sleeps. And to note, the churchyard where his father sleeps is actually where my cousin got to visit, and a lot of our family has gotten to visit up in Saratoga Springs. Thank you all.
Thank you.
At this time, we are going to place the marker for the site of the Goodwin Templeton Jail. I'm not sure who has it as I say that. John, where's John? There it is. And Phil, where are you?
There he is.
And Linsey? Yeah. All right. Do you have ties for it? Or anything?
I only know one place in the world. Yes, I work in that vehicle. Where says credit card.
What? Where, Linsey? I'm sorry. Where is Linsey?
Over here.
Huh?
Right.
Hi. I'm sorry. All right. This is the marker. Like this. All right. I can, yes, but I want you all to see what it looks like. Okay. It says, site of the Goodwin Templeton Jail. This is where 12 Years a Slave author Solomon Northup was held in the spring of 1841. This is sacred ground. Do not disturb. No stadium allowed. And it has a note at the bottom that says, of the 10 other slavery-related sites targeted for the revitalized RVA plan, 3 are also located within the proposed stadium area. So I'd like to ask Linsey if she would mind actually placing the marker. And do you want to help?
We might be able to legalize all this, so one of us.
Okay, so because of the conditions, it's difficult to attach it over there, and because of the opportunity, we're going to place it there on the private parking sign. Because this is the property owned by and to be developed by H. Louis Solomonsky, who is one of the developers involved in the stadium development plan.
I mean, why are we doing it here? Anybody?
I know. Hey!
Granddaughter right there.
after you take a few moments to appreciate this moment, we are going to move over to 17th and East Broad Street. So just up the block to 17th and East Broad Street for the presentations there.